to the American people what's happening in Syria, the destabilization of Syria. This is not good for us. This is not good for any human beings. This is Libya 2.0, the same thing they did to Libya in 2011. And right now, the purpose of the New York Times and a bunch of fake American leftists out there is to whitewash. These are Al-Qaeda offshoots, Al-Nusra. They're trying to repackage all of this. They're trying to whitewash what they're calling HTS, the people who've marched on Damascus. You have the Israelis coming from the south. You have the Turkish forces coming from the north. All of these different entities, they have their own proxy forces. Of course, the United States has had how many thousands and thousands of troops over there. Syria is oil rich up in the north. How do we cut through all of the propaganda? Because what they're doing is they're having this hyper focus on quote unquote Assad's prisons and in dungeons. And that's not to take away from anybody's suffering, but all of this sensationalism, it deserves context. Don't forget they did the same thing to Libya with their sensationalism there. Their big story back in 2011, if you remember, was that Gaddafi had given the Libyan troops Viagra and unleashed them on innocent women. And so they always come up with these lies to try to mask over what their designs are. What does this all mean for Palestine? Syria historically has been the backbone of this axis of resistance. How telling that these terrorist forces, and notice how the New York Times, in the mouthpieces of U.S. imperialism, suddenly they're saying rebel forces. Suddenly Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra repackaged are no longer terrorists. Notice how they're not in conflict with the Zionists. They're not even talking about the G side. This is a huge defeat for the Palestinian people. This is a dark day for the entire world. There's a ton of confusion and obfuscation. First and foremost, this is a media war. This is an informational war against Syria. To understand the Syrian economy, 23, 24 million people in this country, I think it's important to look at Cuba and draw a comparison. When you've been sanctioned, when you've been blockaded, when you've been the victim of an imperialist economic war for so many decades, the average Syrian soldier in the Syrian Arab army makes roughly $40, $45 per month. This is hunger. This is Western enforced hunger. Of course, the quote unquote regime, of course, this government fell so quickly. The average terrorist fighter could get $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 per month. So the same way that they've starved Cuba, they've starved Syria. That's not to say that Bashar al-Assad or Hafez al-Assad, his father, were any great heroes. These were not Fidel Castro's or Ernesto Che Guevara's, far from it. But they did represent, on some level, a Syrian nationalism and, of course, solidarity with the Palestinian cause. If you want to understand this war on Middle Eastern sovereignty, go back to the 1980s. What did the CIA, what did the U.S. do with full Western backing to Guatemala, to El Salvador, of course, Nicaragua, all of Central America? This is a war on the self-determination, not just of the Palestinians, but of the entire Middle East. Let's see if there's any other major points here. So the rebels, because their funding comes from the West, because they're coordinating with the Mossad and the Israelis, they're not even mentioning that they're against the Israelis. The Israelis have invaded. They've taken more Syrian land. They're in Damascus now. They're in the suburbs of Damascus. They've bombed Syria thousands of times over the past few decades. And over the past 72 to 96 hours, they've bombed hundreds and hundreds of times. They've crippled the infrastructure. This was the military infrastructure of the axis of resistance. This has completely removed Iran from the equation. Who's going to defend the Palestinians now? We've seen what has happened to Hezbollah in the past month or two. So it's this domino effect, one after another. It'll come out in 25 years when it's no longer relevant. This is the CIA. These are our taxpayer dollars at work. It's extremely difficult, obviously, to document. Now, this is creating a huge problem around the world. Syria is the new epicenter of terrorism. You have an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 Uyghur terrorists or from the Muslim areas of China. What's going to happen now with all this infighting in Syria? They're going to be trying to send these fighters back out because they're a headache there in the Middle East. And they're going to return to China. They're going to return to Chechnya or Russia. They're going to return to Turkmenistan. They're going to return to Kyrgyzstan with all of the terrorism that they've learned from the CIA. This is the Mujahideen 2.0. Same thing they did to the Soviets in 1978. This is going to have rippling effects because, of course, Erdogan in the north, Netanyahu, Anthony Blinken's en route to Turkey now. They're not thinking of the long term, all of the destabilization of an area of the world, one of the richest areas of the world. Of course, oil, gas, 500 million human beings who've been watching this slaughter of the Palestinians. But what the West is saying is, okay, now you can get sanctions relief. Now your money can be worth something. We'll trade with you again. We'll invest. But you have to drop the Palestinian cause. A lot of what we're seeing on Instagram and on other social media outlets is a complete misinformation, hyper-focusing on the quote-unquote alleged crimes of the Bashar al-Assad regime. I don't deny that those are there, but if you were fighting terrorists, if you were fighting Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and all of these different outfits backed by the West, right? Well, why would ISIS and Al-Qaeda be bombing? They bombed Moscow a few months ago. They bombed Tehran on the anniversary of Soleimani's death. None of this adds up. Who is holding the puppet strings? And who do they go after? They go after the Iranian embassy. Now they're saying for the first time in Lebanon, in Syria, there's going to be Israeli embassies and U.S. embassies. Netanyahu said it. He went to the UN, and that's why the October 7th attack happened. Netanyahu went to the UN and said, this is the new Middle East. So here you have it. This is the quote-unquote new Middle East. This is imperialist strategy 101 playing out. Hopefully these bullet points help you to connect the dots, because most of what we're seeing out there is a lot of short-sighted, cowardly, pro-Zionist, pro-imperialist analysis.